What is up, my cutouts? Cardboard Ninja here, coming at you with a quick video. Someone in my comments requested that I explain the difference between fusing a cabin for damage resistance versus bonus durability, and that they were told that bonus durability is better in all circumstances, but they don't know why. So first and foremost, this is going to require an understanding of damage resistance mechanics in Crossout, which is going to be annoying. However, I'm going to fast forward this to the very end for everyone who does not give one shit about any of this. The answer is yes, you should always fuse your cabin for durability. Damage resistance is technically the worst fusion, and the reason is what I'm about to get into. So, what is damage resistance in Crossout? Damage resistance goes under many names because the devs have renamed it to a whole bunch of things. They call it damage protection, they call it damage resistance, they call it damage resilience, they call it damage blocking, and there's two different mechanics at play, and they keep naming both of them interchangeably. So, for the sake of consistency, we're going to call the fusion that you get for damage resistance, even though it says resist all damage, we're going to call that damage protection. And the reason why we're going to call this damage protection is because that's what they called it. They called it that on the tackler. When the weapon doesn't fire, its damage protection increases by 100%. So from here on out, the fusion for damage, air quotes, resistance is called protection, and anything that falls under the damage protection category falls under a very simple damage resilience formula. And then we have actual damage resistance, damage blocking, whatever you want to call it, and that is straightforward, real simple. It is exactly as it is listed. So just keep those in mind as we go forward. So when you compare two different builds, and one has durability increase and the other one has damage resistance, what ends up happening is when you add durability to a cabin, in this instance, we're going to add the largest plates in the game, 8 APC roof parts. When you run it for a test, you can see that you have 1498 durability. The reason why is because you simply add 138 per APC roof part until you have 8 of them, which will give you a total of 1,104 bonus hit points on top of base hit points. And by the way, each of these setups has the exact same durability. They each have, I believe, a base of 670 durability. See? So, what happens when you add those exact same parts to a cabin that has 10% durability fusion? Well, you have 1581. That's more hit points. That's actually a little bit more hit points right there. So how many more hit points is that exactly? It is not as many as you'd think. It's 110.4 more hit points, because for every part that you put on, this says 138, you're adding 138 to your cabin hit points, but your cabin durability is increased by 10%. So every structural part that you add gives you 10% more. Well, what's the difference exactly? That's the key, because everyone's like, well, wait a minute, if you have 10% damage resistance and you have, or 10% more hit points, that's the same. And that's where we get into the problem with damage protection. Damage protection does not work exactly as you think it does. It doesn't protect for the exact number that it says it does. It protects for a number that is a formula. It's a formulaic number. So if we shoot this damage ball over there, it does 266. How much damage would this do to this cabin in your mind? Just do the math real fast. You're like 10% off of 266. That's going to be minus 26.6 damage. That'd be like 200 and what? Let's just do the math. That's 266. I swore I was going to do all this math beforehand, but I didn't. Times 0.9. It should do 239.4 damage. Or 239. Wait a minute, that's 241. That did more damage than 239. That would be 10% off. But we got less than 10% damage reduction, didn't we? That's weird. Now, when you're kibitzing with small numbers, that doesn't seem like it makes much of a point. You're like, who cares? That's like 2 damage off. That doesn't matter. It matters, because damage protection works on a very simple formula. It is what prevents you from reaching 100% damage resistance in the game. It's the reason why you can never become invulnerable. It goes a little something like this. Damage is equal, or final damage is equal to the damage that you take divided by 1 plus damage resistance. So in this instance, you're dividing damage by 1.1. What does this matter, Cardboard Ninja? Skip to the point. In reality, what that means is this cabin, fused for 10% damage protection, actually only provides 9.09% damage resistance. What we would want reduced in damage. 9.9. It doesn't give 10. So, because it only gives 9.09, what that means is, in every situation, no matter what situation you come across, a flat, actual, factual 10% additional durability is always better. You might be thinking, how much better? Is it that big of a difference? Well, it's obviously the difference between it's 0.901. I'm sorry, 0.91% difference. Does that add up? First of all, yes, it does. Because here's the kicker. You can add damage resistance via, let's say, the averter to this cabin. So now this cabin has an additional bit of damage protection. But once again, this is not as much damage protection as you think it is. Even though it says it's resisting damage by 30%, you're not getting 30%. I can guarantee you're not getting 30%. The averter's damage resistance, following the same damage calculation that I showed you earlier, where you take damage and you're going to divide it by 1.3, actually equates to 23.07% damage resistance. But here's the kicker. If you add in that damage resistance stacks with any bonus hit points that you get. So in this instance, while you have 23.07% damage resistance damage protection on the cabin, you also are getting the additional benefit of the bonus 10% more hit points, and in this case, it's 104.4 more hit points in this very specific instance. But that 104.04 hit points also gets the 23.07% damage resistance. But, Cardboard Ninja, I hear you saying, what about in this instance? Can't you just averter this as well? How does that work? Well, you can averter this cabin. But damage dealt to the cabin, damage protection is added to each other. It is additive, meaning that right now, damage resistance is damage divide by 1.4. And so if we took 100 damage and we divide that by 1.4, which is... So now we are only up to 28.57% damage resistance. So even though this is a damage protection value of 40%, you're only getting the equivalent of 28.57% damage resistance. So as you can see, it begins to asymptote. And for those of us wondering, well, how does this work? Well, like, by wondering, is there a maximum? There is no maximum. You can never, under this formula, this very simple formula, you can never reach invulnerability. It's impossible. It just keeps getting closer and closer to zero. And in fact, the reason why I brought up the tackler is because it gives 100% damage protection. 100% damage protection, you would think, if this were as simple as it doing minus 100% damage, would be 0, right? No. At 100% damage protection, you take damage and you divide it by 1 plus 1, which is 2, which is 50%. So we are looking at 266. This should do 133 damage. Ta-da! All right. So there you have it. Ultimately, that is the reason why when you fuse a cabin for any reason, you prefer to have more durability. Because the durability stacks with any damage resistance perks that you can obtain. So in case you're interested, Grizzly's damage resistance is considered damage protection. It works for your entire build, not just your cabin, but it does work for your cabin as well. And so this will make your entire car 30% more resilient to damage because it has damage protection. All other cabins that do this, we're just going to go to crafting, and we're going to go to technology tree, we're going to go to the cabins. Cabins that provide damage resistance are the Call, which will give you 35%, 10% damage resistance per drone up to 30%. The Ermac, which everyone knows, it got nerfed down from 30% down to 21%. And of course, we know that that's going to provide significantly less than that, because even with 30%, it's only 23.07% damage resistance. So the Ermac, the cohort's active ability gives a 30%, which is another 27% or 23.07%. And if I recall correctly, I think there's one other cabin that gets damage resistance of some form. Technically, I'm actually skipping the Bastion for a reason. For those of us wondering if I'm like, oh, what about the Bastion? No, the Bastion is just a little bit different. I believe those are all the cabins that actually provide some form of damage resistance. So all of those damage resistance fall under the damage protection category. So then what is actual damage resistance or damage blocking? What is that? That is what is provided by the Bastion. If you look on the stats of the Bastion, as you can see right there, it has little icons under the word features, and those features show the number 50%, and it shows bullets, and it shows 50% blast, and it shows 50% collision and 50% thermal. Anything that hits that front plate gets those damage blocks or damage resistances, etc. And this is as written. And there are many items, most of them structural parts, that actually have this. The small plow, for example, has 90%, which means it's 90% off. Straight up, you only take 10% collision damage. That is across all bumpers, all of them. The screener has damage pass-through. So it will take 90% less damage from collision, and 25% of the damage is going to pass through to the next part. Pass-through works exactly like damage blocking, where the part itself is going to take the listed amount of damage. If you invert this, gun mounts, they have 90% damage pass through. In other words, 90% damage resistance for the part itself, though the remaining damage will pass through up to the 7-pin rule. Catch that video if you haven't seen it already. And that is for all of these parts. In addition to that, there are other cabins that have damage resilience or damage blocking of their own type, such as the Tusk. The Tusk takes 75% less contact damage, which is melee damage. So it's very difficult to melee these down because it takes only 25% of whatever melee damage is coming through. In addition to that, I believe there is also the Cerberus that also has that contact damage resistance. Other than that, I don't think off the top of my head there's anything else that is more resilient to damage other than the Bastion. So now you're sitting there thinking, okay, so you've got these two damage types. How do those interplay with each other? And they interplay with each other iteratively, meaning it will go to one set of damage resistance and then to the other linearly, one after the other. They don't add together. So, and I forgot to actually do this, but that's fine. We're going to grab a Bastion, and we have a ye old Bastion cabin. So in this instance, I have my Bastion cabin, and my Bastion cabin is unfortunately fused, so I don't have a virgin Bastion cabin, but it is fused for 10% damage protection. So, as we've saw before, it's going to take 241 damage. However, if you shoot the front plate, it will take 50% damage and then reduce that remaining damage by 9.09%, taking it down to 120. If you add an averter, adding additional, making this 40% damage resilience, or sorry, damage protection, then if you strike the front plate, it's going to go down to 95 damage. Now, here's the interesting thing. This is the reason why, by the way, the Omamori is considered so overpowered. The Omamori does not work on damage protection. It works on damage resistance. So, what this means is, it splits the damage in half, straight halved. It is exactly as written, just like the Bastion cabin. So if we fire this here, we're looking at 266. We're going to take 25% of 266, which is something like 66 damage or something. But I took 60 instead of 66 because of the fact that I have 9.09% damage resistance as well. So there you have it. Basically, that is how damage resistance, damage resilience, works in Crossout. Hope that helped a whole bunch of people. Just, again, the takeaway is if you fuse something and you want it to be more durable, then you want the 10% durability increase. As the 10% durability increase stacks not diminishingly with damage resistance. So, simply put, if you end up having more hit points, so for an example, the setups that we have here, this thing will have far more hit points. Of course, without the bonuses to durability, or sorry, without additional parts, the damage resistance is better, but that's never going to be the case. But in this instance, this difference is going to be a difference of 104. And that 104, if you add any other damage resistance, such as, say, the actual perk of the cohort itself, which will increase the damage resistance of the actual cabin, sorry, damage protection of the cabin by 23.07%. That is, of course, that additional 100 hit points. Basically, it's going to give you an additional 23 hit points for every 100 hit points that you have. And that additional, every 1,000 hit points you have will give you an additional 100 hit points. So it's basically, you get far more durable. You get far, far more durable with 10% more durability because of the fact that, of the way that damage resistance stacks across each other, stacks with itself. And that's it. That's more or less it. Hopefully that answers some questions and helps people out in the video game. You can do all these tests yourself in your own garage to, confirm any of this stuff. But yeah, that's the math. Damage protection is equal to damage divided by 1 plus whatever your damage protection values all added together are. Damage resilience or damage blocking or whatever is just the flat number that it says it is, and that is linearly added to whatever damage protection that you have, iteratively, one right after the other, which is the reason why you can never reach 0 damage taken. All right, there you go. That's a quick video. Banged it out for you. Like, subscribe, yada, yada, yada. Peace.